Welcome to Living Fully. Each episode is a chance to talk about mental health in a way that's simple, honest, and helpful. We'll share stories, tips, and tools to help you feel supported and feel your best. I'm your host, Katherine Hurtig. We've all struggled with body image at some point, right? In a world where there are so many expectations about what we quote-unquote should look like, it's tough not to let that affect how we feel about ourselves. I'm talking with social worker Sharona Pilmeister today, and we're getting into what shapes our body image, how it changes through different stages of life, and how we can work on loving ourselves more, just as we are. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that in today's episode, we discuss topics related to body and clothing sizes, as well as eating disorders. If these are sensitive topics for you, please take care while listening, and feel free to pause or skip the episode if needed. Thanks for having me. So it's been a little while since you've been on the podcast. Refresh our listeners. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. I'm a registered social worker. I've been with Calgary Counseling Center for about 2 years now. In a past life, I worked with seniors in the mental health field. Now I'm here.
Excellent. Well, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, I think to kind of preface, everyone is going to have a different view, different thoughts about their bodies and the way they look. I guess we're going to kind of take it for the most part from the perspective of, North American culture, because definitely different cultures, different backgrounds, different families, that all plays a part in how we see ourselves. But yeah, for the most part, coming at it from the North American standpoint.
Yes.
Sound fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will make comments here and there about considering your own background just as a prompt. But yes, definitely North American.
Perfect.
Western. Yeah.
So Sharona, why do we struggle so much? Well, why can we with our self-image and how we feel about how we look?
It's all about social comparison. Comparing yourself to the culture that you were raised in, to the culture that you're being brought up in, if those two are different. Maybe religious aspects of how you should be behaving, how you should be looking, what success looks like, all of these things. And yeah, we're comparing to that standard and we're comparing to other people.
Yeah.
And that's how we end up maybe struggling a little bit.
So why do we compare ourselves? Like what's subconsciously, what's the purpose behind that? Why do we do that?
I think in a biological perspective, we compare to make sure that we can receive the love that we need. We have to be a certain way oftentimes to feel loved and cared for by parents, by community, in school, that kind of thing.
Does the way that we view ourselves, our appearance, does that change as we go through different stages of life?
I think generally, yes.
Yeah.
Probably regardless of what culture you're coming from, getting older is talked about. And so when I think about Western ideals, I think about hiding the way that aging is changing our bodies, dyeing gray hairs or getting Botox for wrinkles, that kind of thing. And then I also think about kind of our attitude towards getting older and how calling someone old is an insult. Yeah. While in other cultures, getting older is a privilege and seen as a gift, and you're filled with all this wisdom.
So it is very cultural, hey?
I think so.
Yeah.
Based on what I've seen, for sure, with my clients. Yeah.
And, like growing up in this Western culture, I find that so unfortunate that there is this pressure to stay young and, this feeling of like not being good enough anymore as you age. I'm not saying that I'm consider myself old by any means, but I'm starting to feel it a little. The gray hairs are coming in and things are changing, and it's a weird kind of transition and pressure to feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a societal pressure.
Yeah.
It's not that it's your brain just making things up. It's our culture that's making you feel.
That's sending us these messages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do different genders experience body image differently?
So I'll say that all genders can experience body image issues, because sometimes that is a shock to folks. And I think that if we look at gender as more of a spectrum, then what I'll say is for some folks, they're socialized in a way where talking about body image issues is less stigmatized
Right.
than others.
Yeah.
And the example that comes to mind is in Mean Girls, where there's that scene where all of the popular girls are in the room talking about all their insecurities, and then they look at the main character and they are expecting her to say something too.
Right.
And she wasn't raised to do that. And so she didn't know what to say. And it makes me think that for some people, this is an expectation. This is something that you do. You're supposed to feel
Like to have some sort of issue with
insecurity.
Yeah, insecurity with your looks. Yeah.
Right. Well, with other folks that I've talked to, having this conversation about, oh, I'm insecure about this, about my body, or about my progress in life, that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they're told from a young age to kind of hide that.
Yeah, and I guess that's not to say that those insecurities aren't there. It's
Right.
just that they don't feel safe enough to have those conversations.
Yeah, and it's almost not socially acceptable to.
Right.
Yeah.
How can the way we feel about ourselves, our appearance, our bodies, how does the way we feel about it affect different aspects of our life?
I think that it can be very broad ranging.
Right.
Like I think about some folks who don't want to leave the house, whether it's about appearance or just feeling not great about where they're at in life, you know, if they've lost their job or something like that. I think about maybe having a difficulty connecting with others in a romantic setting, in a friendship setting, at work, feeling inadequate in some capacity. And I also think about folks who have self-image on their mind all the time. You know, like running through all of these times where they've screwed up in their lives, or thinking about fantasizing about this body that they want, or hyperfixating on what their body looks like in clothes, that kind of thing.
When I was about 14, I think, I developed a bit of an eating disorder, and that, like you were describing, that fits the experience to a T. It was an obsession. It was like all I thought about is looking this certain way, and like I'm only going to be accepted, I'm only going to be loved, I'm only going to be, you know, deemed acceptable if I look this certain way.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of empathy for that 14-year-old self, because that's kind of what society is teaching her.
Yeah.
That her physical appearance is what's most important. Her physical appearance is what will help her feel loved and help her be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I was going through all that, thankfully I had a very loving mother, and she was able to pick up on the fact that these thoughts and behaviors weren't too healthy. And maybe, you know, because of my age, I didn't necessarily pick up on it as easily. But how could someone kind of pick up on trends of the way they're thinking or feeling, and how can someone know that their self-image could be negatively impacting their mental health?
I think about the important aspects in our lives. So I think about social connection. And if you don't want to reach out to friends or family, I'm thinking that's probably impacting your mental health. If you find it difficult to leave the house, I'm thinking about, you know, are you getting the movement that you need? Are you getting fresh air? Are you getting sunlight? Are you getting vitamin D? Like all of these things. And I also think about, if your body image is always on your mind, then do you have space to think about the things that make life worth living?
Right.
Your cat.
Yeah.
Your hobbies.
Yeah, your friends.
Your friends. Yeah.
So we mentioned at the start, like we talked about comparison. And I think now more than ever, that's something that we're all doing, in big part because of social media. And I mean, I think we all know people are posting kind of their highlight reels on social. They're posting the good things, the pictures of themselves that think look the best, the times of their life that are the happiest. Sharona, how do you see social media impacting the way that we see ourselves?
Oh my gosh. In every possible way. Because you have access to any kind of content about any kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I guess one way that social media can impact the way that we see ourselves is if we believe everything that we see online.
Right.
If everyone else is living a perfect life in a perfect body and we aren't, we may start to question why. Why aren't we? So here's your reminder that photo editing exists and it's really powerful. And
that a lot of life happens beyond an Instagram feed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. In terms of what we can do to protect our self-worth, I've been encouraging my clients to consider who they follow and how their content makes them feel. Which sounds like the most Gen Z therapist thing ever to say. But I'm asking folks to curate their feeds.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's true. Yeah.
right. So I was talking to this one student. She's in her early 20s. She's getting her engineering degree. And the people that she's following are going on lavish vacations and have a giant clean house. And all of these things were making her feel really bad about herself.
Yeah.
You know, her lack of time, her lack of finances, etc. And we started looking at who she follows. And these are folks who are affluent and who have the time to be going on lavish vacations. And so instead, she started following accounts that are about frugal fashion and frugal cooking and other engineering students who are also struggling and doing little study with me TikToks and YouTube videos. Yeah. And she found community in that.
Yeah, I think that's so important to kind of do an audit of your social every once in a while. Yeah. And I've definitely done that where you just kind of go through and it's like, okay, this content, how is it making me feel? And if it's not good, you don't have to keep it around.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was going through my body image struggles, I found myself only following people who had very different bodies than me. Mm-hmm. And when I started to diversify the bodies that I was seeing on my feed and the different outfits that people can create for, you know, whether they're a size 12 or a size 4, it started to give me this feeling of, okay, I'm not alone. Other people struggle with body image. Here's how they're styling themselves.
Or, yeah, like it's just, if you're exposing yourself to that diversity of the way people look, you don't feel like as much of an other.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, representation matters.
Yeah.
We get to control our feeds. And I actually had to search for folks in different bodies because what came up on my feed was, you know, the size 0, the size 2, and I'm not that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of differentiate? Because sometimes, you know, you follow certain people as an inspiration to what you want to achieve, whether that's their lifestyle or the way they look. Is that always going to turn out to be a negative thing? Or can it be a motivator? Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that we can certainly take motivation from these accounts. I think that where I would warn folks is, does the motivation feel good? Right. Or do you just feel really crappy when you see them?
Like, do you actually feel motivated, or do you feel brought down that you're not that?
Right.
Yeah.
And then I also consider, is what you're aiming for actually achievable? With the capacity that you have, the time you have, can we fill the shoes that we are trying to fill?
Right.
Based on these other people that we're following.
Yeah.
Or is our motivation to do that even our motivation, or is that what society tells us we need to do? And can we consider that? And
that point, that makes me think, is in a lot of my conversations with counselors, the idea of values comes up. Mm-hmm. And that seems like it would be fitting here. Like kind of that question, is it my motivation or is it society's? So how would someone kind of go about discerning that?
I would start to ask yourself why.
Why do I want to look like this person? Yeah.
Why do I want to be like this person? Why do I want to look like this person? What benefit would it bring me to be like them?
And then, so, if you were working on something like that with a client, what's the next step there? So I've answered that why.
Right.
Then what?
Then it's kind of like, is this valuable to me? If I want to look like this person because I will fit into my clothing better, is that of value? Is that what you need to be happy?
Right.
You've asked all these questions. You figured out these like value indicators. What is important to you? And then I would encourage folks to ask themselves in general, does this person in this body that I really want, do I think that they're happier because of it? Mm-hmm. Because any person on this planet deals with hard things. Different things, but hard things.
Yeah, no matter what they look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Are we creating a connection between having this desirable body and just happiness and fulfillment?
Mm-hmm. So we talked about kind of having a curated social feed. Are there any other ways that you recommend kind of limiting the unhealthy comparisons we have? Like whether that's scrolling social media or out in the world?
Yeah, I would say that cognitive-based tools or thought-based tools can be helpful. So one of my favorites is when I recognize that I'm comparing, I'll tell myself that they aren't better or worse. They are just different.
Right.
And we're all different.
Yeah. I think, so much of the time we're assigning a value to something when it's just different.
Yes.
It's not better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I'll also say that especially thought-based tools like this take mental energy. Mm-hmm. And if you are scrolling TikTok for 6 hours, like many of us do sometimes, that mental effort, that mental capacity to keep your brain in check runs out.
Totally, yeah.
If we're scrolling for 10 minutes, I can tell myself, okay, not better or worse, just different, and repeat it to myself if I need to. But I'm not going to repeat it for 6 hours straight.
No.
At some point, my brain gives up on that. And that's human.
Yeah, so then that's a whole other conversation about limiting how much of that kind of stuff we're exposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And notice how I'm not saying get rid of it. Go cold turkey, no social media. For some folks, that is accessible. For many of us, it isn't. So if we're spending 2 hours on social media and we can move it to an hour and a half or an hour 45, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book right now about kind of the process of assessing how much screen time we have and using, smartphones and such. And I'm finding it really interesting and helpful. And just kind of that process of assessing, like, is this actually improving my life?
Yes.
And the book talks about the same thing, not cutting it out completely, just being a bit more intentional about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Intentionality is so important. And it actually can make it feel like a nice thing.
Yeah. And not something that you feel a compulsion to.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Sharona, do you think the media in any of its forms, like, social media or film and television or whatever, do you think it's made progress in more representation of different body types, different beauty standards? Or do you think we've got a ways to go?
We've made progress and we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and this woman who identifies as a plus size beauty creator mentioned that, 5 years ago, this would not be an option as a job for her based on the body that she's living in. And so that brings me a little bit of hope that I am seeing diverse bodies. At the same time, I think about all of the negative comments they get. And I think about how, maybe we haven't gone as far as I'm thinking that we have.
Right.
So I think that we are moving forward, and also we have a long way to go.
Totally.
Yeah.
Speaking of, unrealistic beauty standards, how can someone recognize when they might be being influenced by that? By these, ideas that aren't attainable?
I think that in some ways, any beauty standard is unrealistic. And what I mean by that is if we are all different, like we just talked about, right? But we have a standard for what everyone should look like or how everyone should be doing.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
There's something deeply curious there.
That's a great way to put it.
That's my kind way of putting it. That being said, ways that we can start to identify these beauty standards that we're trying to abide by, just look at your daily life and sometimes ask the question, why? Why am I feeling like I need to shave my legs? Why is it important for me to have a full hairline? Why is it important for me to have a tiny waist? Why is me being a certain height important or a certain size of pants? Yeah. So then can't we just say that, you know, everyone is different and everyone is going to show, like everyone can show up as themselves and we don't need a standard to tell us who's attractive and who isn't?
I mean, and easier said than done.
Of course.
We can say this all we want, but how does someone work towards believing that when they currently don't? You know, if someone's sitting here like, I don't like my body, I want to look this way, how do they take the steps to shift, to have more self-acceptance? And yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, of course. I want to say that if you are listening to this podcast and waiting for me to give you that magic answer that's going to help you either get to the body that you want or feel acceptance, I'm going to say I'm going to disappoint you. It is a lifelong struggle for a lot of us. Yeah. Sometimes it's harder than others in like different eras of our lives. But I do have 2 tools that we can consider to help start pushing this needle towards acceptance. The first one, celebrate what your body does.
I like that, yeah. So it's not all about what it looks like, but what it can do for you.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that we hear this kind of dialogue and, you know, go run a marathon and celebrate your personal record time or whatever. I'm thinking, did you get off of your bed this morning? Right. That took certain muscle coordination, your nervous system had to play some parts in this, your brain. That was a very complex procedure that your body just performed. Or if you took care of children today, took care of a household, went to work, went to school, there were millions of little tasks that your brain and your body performed for you to be able to live your life today.
Yeah, and that's pretty incredible.
It's pretty incredible. And I would encourage folks to nerd out on it. Find a biology textbook, find a YouTube video that explains even how we take one step. It's crazy.
I really like that idea of focusing more on what your body can do. And I know, like, we've talked a lot on this podcast about how important and how connected physical health is to mental health and how movement can be it can really positively impact your mental health. I found that personally, like, you know, I've talked about how much I love running, and that whole journey, it's taught me a million different things about my mental health. But one of them is definitely how I see my body, for sure. Like, I'm just so much more grateful for what it can do and a lot less critical. And, you know, talking about my struggles with food and eating, it's changed that as well. I'm not as critical of myself in that way. It's like I need to fuel properly if I want to run well. So I'm not going to be hard on myself if I'm craving that cheeseburger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, you said like you had a couple tools and one of them was thinking about what your body can do. Is there another?
Yes. The other one is, again, this is all brain work. And talking about that capacity piece of sometimes we don't have the capacity to be thinking these different ways. But if you do have some capacity, you can practice calling out the beauty standards that you are trying to reach. You know, I give the example of if you catch yourself thinking about your wrinkles, think about who benefits from placing this beauty standard in the first place. I think about the many millions of dollars beauty companies make on these insecurities.
Billions, probably.
Billions, yeah. And that makes me feel a little better. about wrinkles, about skin imperfections, cellulite, etc., etc., etc. So that's another tool. And all of these pieces that we've already talked about, setting time limits, curating your social media feeds. If you're watching TV that has commercials going, if those commercials aren't feeling good, just leave.
Yeah.
Come back in a couple minutes.
Yeah, like making more, we talked about being intentional about what we consume.
Yes.
And how it makes us feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've touched on this a bit, but maybe not, explicitly. Like, how can self-compassion and that concept help when we're feeling critical about our appearance?
I think that self-compassion is the start to this work, to understand that we aren't purposefully doing this to ourselves. We are coming from a society that wants very specific things from us. And so having self-compassion for the days that, we need an extra rest between gym days, or softening our expectations for what we look like. Today getting ready for this podcast, I found a pimple on my face. Mm-hmm. Hooray. And I had to have self-compassion for that because otherwise, a couple years ago, I would have gone into this spiral of I can't believe that I, probably didn't wash my face properly the night before. And here I am appearing on a podcast, even though people can't see me. And I have this pimple. So there's that aspect. And it can also remind us that there's our existence beyond our bodies. Our self-compassion doesn't come from our physical body.
Right. Yeah, we're worth so much more than what we look like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your work with clients, do you recommend the idea of positive self-talk? Like that can that play a role in kind of shaping how we feel about ourselves?
It definitely can. But I think that sometimes this is presented as a quick fix.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I can look in the mirror and say, I love you 10 times, then I will feel better. And maybe for some folks that works. I think for most of us, we say it 10 times and are just grumpy because it didn't help. So positive self-talk is a shift over time. Is a shift that when 2 years ago, I would have thought about this pimple on my face and thought about it all day. Mm-hmm. Now, in the morning, I saw it and I thought, oh gosh, really? And then I moved on. And then I came to work and then I went on this podcast and I'm still talking about my pimple, but in a different way.
I think that's a really important point to make, is that anything to do with our mental health, any kind of shift that we want to make there, unfortunately, it does. It takes time and work.
And I think, too, when we talk about this work in counseling, the changes are often tiny in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then we look back to 2 years ago and it's like, wow.
Totally. Yeah.
Things have changed.
Yeah, it really builds up and you don't notice it until you can look back.
Yeah. Or maybe sometimes we never look back on the right things. Like if I didn't have this pimple come up today, I wouldn't have thought about how 2 years ago this would have been a spiral moment.
Yeah.
Part of this work is actually taking the time to look back and seeing where you came from.
And really celebrating that, I think.
Yes.
Another tip is, I'd say, kind of keeping track of that stuff and celebrating even the small things that become easier over time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the way we see and feel about our bodies, I'm sure that starts pretty young. Mm-hmm. So how can parents start their kids off on the right foot? How can they at least help them have a positive self-image early on?
Yes. I love this conversation. It is so important. Children are sponges.
Yeah.
The way that you speak about your body, their body, other people's bodies becomes part of their inner dialogue. And so what I like to encourage is for parents to do their best not to vocalize their comments about bodies around their kids. So I'll give an example. Even a quote-unquote positive comment like, wow, Auntie's looking really skinny today. Auntie's lost a lot of weight. Highlights the importance of thinness.
Yeah.
But in terms of doing things maybe differently than how we were raised, read books with illustrations of different bodies or diverse bodies. Talk about what bodies can do, how movement can be joyful. Talk about the cool things about yourself, your kids, others around you that have nothing to do with their bodies. Wow, Auntie Carol is really awesome at cooking, isn't she? Wow, that scarf that she knitted, incredible. Look at all those colors. It reminds our children that our conversations within ourselves, about ourselves, can be more than our physical appearance.
Right. Yeah, if it's kind of downplayed, if it's not the focus of praise, then it's probably seen as less important, right?
Or maybe it just doesn't come up.
Yeah.
Right? If we aren't taught how to do that, how to identify these other things, how to feel good about ourselves, if that's not modeled to us, we have to learn that as adults. And that's really hard.
If you have someone in your life, now I'm talking adults, like if you have someone in your life who is really struggling with their self-image, what advice do you have there to help them, to speak to them about that, to speak around it? Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
I would say to start, be compassionate. Regardless of where you are at on your journey, they are on their own. Body image work takes time, and having the time to work on it can be a privilege.
Yeah.
You know, I think about the postpartum folks that I speak to who are feeling not great about their body that has changed. They don't have time to identify beauty standards. No. They don't have time to curate their social media. They don't have time. And we can't, I'm asking folks to be patient. Body image work is hard work. And if your friend or your family member isn't there right now, just be with them. And you can ask them what they need. Do you just need a place to vent? Do you need me to get you out of the house? Do you need me to tell you all the cool things about you that aren't about your body? What do you need? And if they don't know, that's okay. You can also help them fill out an intake form at a counseling center. And I would also say that folks should be aware of how they're feeling in these conversations, aware of their own triggers.
Right.
Even if you see someone struggling, that doesn't mean that you have to help to your fullest extent. You can set boundaries. You can set time limits. You can set the precedent of what feels safe to talk about and what doesn't. And that's okay.
Any last piece of advice, Sharona, about anyone who's kind of struggling with their body image?
I would just say, please remember that you are not broken. Your brain isn't messed up. You aren't illogical for struggling with body image. Just find a place to start this work and go from there.
Thank you so much, Sharona.
Thank you.
Great chat.
I enjoyed it.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick Here, Louisa Campos, Manuel Montano, Jenna Forbes, and by me, Katherine Hurtig. A special thanks to Sharona Pilmeister. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Center and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. Calgary Counseling Center and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling to anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com and counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.